was.
Well, Cliff, Caliph Omar did not capture Jerusalem until 638 AD, 6 years after Muhammad supposedly flew from the site into heaven. The Dome of the Rock wasn't built until AD 692, after Caliph Omar was dead. The mosque itself wasn't built on the Temple Mount until 711 AD. Another caliph, Abd al-Wad, built it. By this time, Muhammad had been dead for 80 years. Therefore, even the name, the Mosque of Omar, is historically inaccurate. Al-Wad didn't even actually build the mosque. Instead, he converted the ruins of the Church of St. Mary that still stood on the site. The caliph's contribution to the mosque, apart from restoring the original church, was the addition of the dome on top of the building. It was Caliph Abd al-Wad who named the converted church Al-Aqsa, so it would sound like the mosque mentioned in the Quran. It seems obvious that Muhammad couldn't have been referring to Jerusalem as the site of the furthest mosque when he compiled the Quran. The mosque didn't exist for a full 3 generations after his death. In the days of Muhammad, the mosque at Mecca was the most sacred mosque, whereas the mosque located in Medina was known as the furthest mosque. Viewed in the light of true history, the basis of the Muslim claim to Jerusalem is impossible.
Hal, it's really phenomenal what a little research will dig up.
It really is, and it's also scary how powerful a myth can be. Now, to sum all this up, this is what the Jew believes is at stake here. Jerusalem is part of being a Jew, and part of being a Jew is Jerusalem. Without one, the other cannot exist. It is the city of promise. Isaiah predicts that Jerusalem will be the world's capital city during the Messiah's 1,000-year reign on earth. The possession of Jerusalem is viewed as critical to the survival of the Israelites. To the Jew, if Jerusalem ceased to be theirs, there is no longer a reason for the state of Israel. God himself calls Jerusalem his holy city at least 11 times. It is the only city on earth so designated. God declares, quote, "It is the city called by my name," end quote. As I previously mentioned, Jesus said, quote, "Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." Jerusalem remained in the hands of the Romans and the Byzantines until AD 638. The invading Muslims drove them out and held the city until the 11th century. It changed hands a number of times after that. Then came the Crusaders. The city was passed back and forth between the Crusaders and the Muslims until the 13th century. Saladin permanently drove out the Crusaders at that time. The Mamelukes of Egypt took over in the 14th century. Jerusalem fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1517. The city was virtually ignored for the next 500 years. Jerusalem became of little importance in the Muslim Turkish Empire. The final stages of Jerusalem's destiny really began when the British General Allenby captured Palestine and Jerusalem in 1917. When the British terminated their mandate over Palestine, May 15th, 1948, the Israelites declared the State of Israel. It was only when the Jews returned and wanted Jerusalem that the Muslims suddenly discovered this current all-consuming passion for Jerusalem. History verifies this statement. In spite of nearly 20 centuries of war, conquest and neglect, the Jerusalem survived, and so did the Jews, confidently praying each Passover next year in Jerusalem. More than 2,500 years ago, the psalmist wrote, "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I do not prefer Jerusalem above my chief joy."
Now, according to history, Muhammad didn't see Jerusalem as a place sacred to Islam. Indeed, he issued a prohibition against the practice of facing Jerusalem in prayer. He had originally instituted the practice as part of an effort to convert Jews to Islam. Well, the effort failed, and on February 12, 624, Muhammad issued an official religious edict forbidding observant Muslims from facing Jerusalem in prayer.
The Israelis claim ownership of the city as their historical capital. In other words, they claim right of prior ownership. The Israelis have a legal claim to the city as the spoils of war also. The Israelis captured the city in 1967 when they defeated the invading Arab armies, including Jordan. Israel also captured what was historically Judea and Samaria. Today, it's called the West Bank. When the largely migrant farmers who had been sent to Palestine to prevent Israeli occupation were abandoned by their Muslim countries, the fleeing refugees were shoved into refugee camps by their own Muslim brothers. They were then presented to the world as the Palestinian people. From one of these refugee camps emerged Yasser Arafat, and overnight the refugees were transformed into something not known before, the Palestinian people. Such status was never given them by the centuries of Muslim rule before Israel was born. President Clinton said the Camp David talks failed because the two sides refused to compromise over Jerusalem. Jerusalem was founded, as we said, by King David. God gave title deed to Jerusalem and only to one people, the Jews. Jerusalem is the only city with a place in eternity, according to the Bible. The Arabs say Jerusalem is their holy city, despite the shabby treatment it's historically received at their hands, and because of the lack of any reference to it in the Quran. By mid-19th century, the city was a neglected backwater where Jews were in the majority. Israel refuses to divide the city, claiming it must remain their eternal, undivided capital forever. Yasser Arafat, on the other hand, demands the city be divided and the half with the Temple Mount be given to him for his capital city. Both sides can't be right. King Solomon was once faced with a similar perplexing dilemma. Two women both claimed the same baby. Solomon offered to divide the child in half. One woman agreed, the other refused. Solomon concluded the one with the right to the child is the one who refused to divide it. It will take someone with the wisdom of Solomon to get these two sides to agree on anything where Jerusalem is concerned.
Well, in Europe, the ghettos were beginning to break up under the impact of the scientific revolution sweeping the continent. Now, the ghettos served two purposes in Europe. First, they kept the Jews away from the Gentiles. It was, after all, the Gentiles who forced the Jews into ghettos to begin with. But it served an important purpose for the Jews. It kept them from being assimilated into their host populations. As the ghetto system began to dissolve, their distinct cultural identity was jeopardized. The Jews of Europe had two choices before them, a homeland or cultural extension. For the Jews of the diaspora, any country, no matter how hospitable, would always be galut, Hebrew for exile. Only Israel could be home. At the close of the 19th century, it was perfectly suited to the purpose. It was a sparsely populated, marginal province of the dying Ottoman Empire. The land was populated by groups from a number of religions and seemed to have no national consciousness of its own.
You know, Cliff, this is so often overlooked, the condition that existed in Palestine at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century.
We try to change history, Hal.
Yeah, it's just been rewritten, it really has. As the ghettos began to disappear in Europe, in Jerusalem, Jews living inside Jerusalem began to rebel against the old religious order. They began to hear the call of the land and started forming communities and revived the ancient Hebrew language, which was probably one of the most centralizing facts of all. Hebrew returned to the Jews as living vernacular and a national renaissance started. It was time, as the prophet Isaiah predicted, quote, "Fear not, for I am with thee. I will bring thy seed from the east and gather thee from the west. I will say to the north, give up, and to the south, keep not back. Bring my sons from afar, and my daughters from the ends of the earth, end quote. The land of Israel responded to the touch of the people of the promise. What was desert 50 years ago, today supplies 95% of Europe's oranges and exports tulips to Holland. The transformation of Israel from desert to wasteland to the oasis it is today could have taken place any time in the last 500 years, years of Muslim rule. Except for this missing ingredient, the land was waiting for the Jews just as Ezekiel 36 promised it would.
Phenomenal, Al. On November 29, 1947, the UN General Assembly passed Resolution 181. That resolution forever changed the status of Jerusalem insofar as the global body politic viewed it. Resolution 181 declared Jerusalem to be a corpus separatum. This is a legal term meaning the body of a separate covenant. By passing 181, the UN declared it has one covenant with Jerusalem and another covenant with the rest of the world. Israel, as a nation, falls under the auspices of the United Nations Charter. Jerusalem, on the other hand, has a special status unique among the cities of the world. It is the only city in the world with such standing. 6 months before there was a state of Israel, Jerusalem was established as an international city under the jurisdiction of the Trusteeship Council. Now, in 1950, the UN passed a document called the Statute for the City of Jerusalem. The UN sets forth its objective to protect and preserve the unique spiritual and religious interest located in the city of the three great monotheistic faiths throughout the world: Christian, Jewish, and Muslim. To this end, to ensure that order and peace, and especially religious peace, reign in Jerusalem.
That's phenomenal, isn't it?
It really is.
That is a factor that I didn't know very much about until we studied it this time.
It just shows you, once again, you use the term myths early, and how they can totally change everything in the minds of people.
Yes, and they become more powerful than the truth.
Yes, they are.